Welcome here. So thankful that you've taken the time to join us today. We wanted to give you some information so that you can further understand the challenges that we face as a community around housing. Always good to share data and to share stories so that we can continue to learn together and also apply that to our own organizations as it may fit. So of course, there's plenty of information here. And a lot of this has been pulled together by the United Way and the Social Research and Planning Council. And so you can have access to not only this particular slide deck in the future, but also reports that it has been pulled from and other data that's been pulled from Social Research and Planning Council reports, which are on our website. So housing, we're going to start with some basics to help everybody get on the same page. One of the most important things we think to understand is the actual definition of what we look at when we talk about what is affordable housing. There's lots of definitions out there. Governments at different levels will have different ways of describing this, but the most common way that people describe it in our industry is around the CMHC definition, which is around when a person is considered to earn enough money to pay for their housing. So housing is considered affordable when a household spends less than 30% of its pre-tax income on adequate shelter. So we utilize that definition at United Way as a springboard for our conversations. And there are, of course, other ways to slice and dice it, but it's important to understand that housing and its affordability relates directly to people's income. That's the point we're trying to make with this definition, right? We need to make sure that people can afford to live in adequate and safe housing. And they can't do so if they're spending too much of their income, of course, on that housing, right? Because it means that it would be taking away from other things. So you'll see this theme throughout our presentation. We're interested also to let you know some general things, right? So when we think about this definition and what it means for people in our community, here we look at household income and the cost of housing, whether that's rental or purchasing. And what we know now is that the median household income is not enough to afford to buy a house anymore, right? So average income is not enough to buy a house, okay? And generally speaking, a single income, an average single income is not enough to afford to rent an apartment anymore, right? And so here's the problem that we're facing. It's no longer something that a few people in our community are facing. It's now increasingly the majority of people who are facing this challenge. So we, of course, at the United Way and many of the organizations that are on this call today are extremely concerned for people who live in deep poverty in our communities. But I'm trying to tell you that it is not only people who are living in deep poverty that are experiencing this. And I think you know this from all the news articles that you're reading, perhaps from stories from your own family, right? When I talk about this, I often say I worry for my children who are in university. Where are they going to live? How are they going to afford to live in this community? I'm not sure the answer to that question, right? We're going to have to do things differently, probably than previous generations. That's part of it. Maybe that's not all bad, but also I would like for them to be able to afford to live in the apartment or the house of their choice. The same is true for my parents. They're trying to downsize. They can't find anything appropriate for them to downsize to. They're in a large house on a property that's getting a little bit too big for them to manage. They'd love to be in a smaller place, but it's difficult to find something that is available to them at an affordable rate. And of course, we'll talk about this more as we go through this, but there are people in our community who today are experiencing homelessness. And that is a significant problem, and those numbers, sadly, since before COVID, have been growing in substantial ways in our communities. And so it is affecting people at all levels of the spectrum. When we think about this too, I want us to understand in relation to price of housing and the price of rent, also income. What you can see here quickly on this chart is that over the last period of time that we were able to gather from the census information, you can see house prices are up 67%, right? We know that rent prices over the 2-year period from 18 to 20 were up 54%. I often say on average, housing is going up by about 60% over the last few years. Meanwhile, our incomes are only up about 20% or 19% on this slide, right? So you can understand very quickly with data that housing prices are vastly outpacing our income growth. Therefore, we have less and less to spend on housing, right? So that's where that ratio from CMHC comes in, that 30%, right? Fewer and fewer people are going to be at that level if their income is a lower portion of what they can afford. When we look at it in more detail, you can see what is known as the benchmark price for housing. And this chart shows you over a period from January 2015 all the way to January 2030 or 2023 rather. And what it shows you is that the cost of housing has gone up substantially. Now, thankfully, it has gone down some since its peak during COVID. But we are still seeing high rates of competition for the available housing. There simply is not enough housing to make those rates come down any further. And so we are seeing, this average price, anywhere in the neighborhood of $550,000 being out of reach for many, many people in our community. When we look at that a little bit further, we can see that there's challenges around supply chains, there's challenges around all kinds of things that are contributing to this. We can go into the depths of understanding why we haven't built as much housing as we need, and all those things are true. It doesn't change the fact that housing prices are high and are likely to continue to be high going forward. When we look at the data in a more granular fashion, we can see that pretty well no one can afford to buy a house. Right? Again, we've been making this point in different ways, but when you look at the overall median household, and when you look at the price of a benchmark home, they can't afford it. A single person can't afford it. Two people can't afford it. A couple can't afford it. A couple with children can sometimes afford it. And this would be because of the way that our society also provides subsidies to children through things like the family child tax benefit, right? And so as we look at income strategies, we are trying to, of course, work at all these issues, right? So we know that family types in our community, many different family types in our community simply cannot make the math work anymore. And so we have a challenge that's facing us. What we know too is that the median couple with children in an economic family is, again, to repeat this, is the only median household which could afford a home, and that would require $110,000 to $120,000 for a down payment. And it doesn't factor in, of course, any other household debt that they might have, right? So keeping in mind that it's still very difficult. That's why the asterisk is there for this particular slide in the calculation. And we know that the most common jobs in Perth-Huron are below the $25 an hour, right? We just know so many jobs are not paying at the level that we need to in order to afford the housing at the current prices. And that's a challenge. It's not only a challenge for the employee, it's also a challenge for the business, right? We are seeing strain at every end of this conversation, right? Businesses are struggling to pay their employees enough to keep them, to make sure that people can live in the same community where they are. So we're talking about workforce strategies, we're talking about housing issues, we're talking about people wanting to live and work in the same community and struggling with that, and it's hard. So further, when we look at rental housing, here we have some information around that. You look at a one-bedroom apartment with rental scans in the region here, $793 in 2018, and in 22 average 1405, right? And I'm sure that you could find examples if you went on looking at housing today that are even higher than these numbers, but keep in mind that these are averages, right? And so we have to understand that that's the case. But either way, there's a massive increase that's happened over the last few years, right? One bedroom apartments, this particular document shows a 77% increase, that's amazing. Or a 3-bedroom or more, 114%. I mean, these numbers are not sustainable. We all know this. It can't keep growing like this, or every one of us will soon be without a home, not just a few people. And so we're working on this naturally. We could talk about all the challenges around this, whether it's rent control policies or other things that influence this. But what we need to know is that the data is telling us a significant story, that rents are going up astronomically, and again, incomes are not going up fast enough to keep up with the data. So further than that, when we look at this in comparison to people experiencing homelessness, there's around 230 people. Of course, it changes daily, the number of people who are experiencing homelessness that we know of. And of course, there are people that we don't know of who are experiencing homelessness. So the number is actually larger than what this represents, are experiencing homelessness in our region currently. A sad reality. And proportionally, our problem is as significant as large urban centers, right? We have people in our communities who are experiencing homelessness, and people are experiencing homelessness in London or Kitchener or Toronto. That is true, and it looks like a bigger problem, but actually it's the same problem. We have people experiencing homelessness in every one of our small communities. They are living in cars. They are living in somebody's bush. They have taken up residence in a shed. People are doing what they have to do to survive, and sometimes they're doing it with children. Sometimes it's seniors that are in this situation. No longer is it only the single individual who, by many people's standard definition of somebody who's experiencing homelessness, has an addiction and another challenge, right? That is true, and people through trauma end up in that situation, and there are people who have many challenges, and it's going to be difficult for us to help them out of homelessness. But I want you to understand that the spectrum is changing. People are experiencing homelessness across the board, so we have to work at that as a community. Now, when you look at incomes again in this chart against rent, I just want to highlight a few things. One of our challenges as a society is that we have not kept up with our end of the bargain in terms of increasing social assistance rates. And so currently, someone who's on Ontario Works is going to spend 195% of their income on housing. How does that work? It doesn't work, right? If you're on ODSP, 109%. Even if you're making minimum wage, remember, we're aiming for 30% here, 57%. Even if you're earning a living wage, which is something we push and promote here, and that keep in mind that living wage is a lagging indicator. It's usually about a year behind data because you're working on last year's data. So you're never going to hit 30% probably. But even when you add up the living wage right now compared to our data, we're telling you that that takes 41% of somebody's income in order to get into the housing market today. Okay, now look at this in terms of jobs that people have: food and service, hospitality, retail, manufacturing, construction. It doesn't matter almost what job you have anymore. It is a problem. And so we have to work hard to try to do things on all ends of the spectrum here. There is no one solution. We have to work at social assistance rates. We have to work at living wage policy. We have to work at helping businesses to thrive and survive in our communities, and be able to pay their people well. All these things are true. It is not one solution. So when we look at this, we also need to add some information about the future. What are we facing? Well, we know that our population is going to grow 22% over the next 20 years. We can combine that with the disproportionate increase in older residents moving into our area, and we can think about other things. In 2046, we can assume the population is going to grow in lots of different ways, via immigration, foreign students, interprovincial movement, and migration, and people moving from cities to country. All those things tell us that we're going to grow in Huron County by 16,474 people. we're gonna grow by 22,000 people, 776 in Perth, and so those numbers are coming. No matter what we say or do, we have to plan for it. It's part of our reality. We're going to have more people here, and those more people are going to need more housing. We can also see that when we look at some of the provincial data, we have not kept pace with building enough housing. So you have, on the one hand, the housing completion numbers in the orange, and then in blue, you have the number of households that are being formed that need housing on the other side. And so even in the 2016 to 21, you can see that our pace is going in the wrong direction, right? There's lots of data around the number of houses that we need. You've seen government ads that say we're going to build X number of thousand units, whatever it might be. It's all based on the fact that we're behind. We don't have enough housing units for the people that are coming. For newcomers, we don't have enough housing for the people that live here and are trying to change from one size household to another. We don't have enough housing for people who are being born today and will need housing in the future. All these things are true, and so we have to continue to work at changing and addressing this issue. There's lots of strategies out there. Lots of good people are working at this, but it's going to take everyone to make a concerted effort over time. As a reminder, when we're thinking about housing, I'm not sure why that looks the way it does. It's missing some things in the middle. Can you see the middle spectrum? I can't see it on my slide.
No, I only see the homelessness.
I'll go forward.
Okay,
Hit
maybe.
forward.
Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. There was a interactive slide. I wasn't expecting it. All right, there we go. So what we want everybody to understand is we talk about housing today, and in particular, in a few minutes when Kathy talks about the role of United Housing in all of this, there is a spectrum that we need to pay attention to, right? So I've already spoken to you about people who are experiencing homelessness briefly, but remember that there are people living in our communities who are unsheltered, right? That's one end of the spectrum. There are some that are emergency sheltered. They could be living in the system, whether it's in Goderich or Stratford or wherever, and they have emergency stay in place. Maybe they're provisionally accommodated, which means they're living with family or friends or in an institution for a longer period of time, hospitals, jails. But that is all homelessness, right? We usually think of homelessness as the people who are living unsheltered, and we see them in our small towns across the region. But it is people who are emergency sheltered and who are provisionally accommodated. Until they have stable, permanent housing, they are not housed. Okay, they are considered homeless in the definition that we're using today. We also want to help people understand the difference between non-market housing and market housing, okay? There's different levels. We know that at the one end, the market housing, home ownership, of course, is the Canadian dream, something that many of us have achieved that are probably on the call today when housing was a lot less expensive. Today, I probably wouldn't be able to buy a house, but 20 years ago when I bought a house, I could afford one. Here I am, the beneficiary of Canada, but my children do not have that going forward. There'll be fewer people, if we keep going the way that we're going, who can afford home ownership. It still may be seen as the ideal, but it is going to be fewer people certainly that are doing that. And we're seeing all kinds of challenges as a result of this. We're seeing corporations buy housing, and now instead of it being seen as a human right, we're going to be subservient to corporations that own our housing. I mean, it's a really big concern. We have, of course, private market rental, and that's where the rental rates largely were coming from that were on the slide decks earlier. And that is where many people are living in the majority, we would say, where people are living in what is called attainable housing or affordable housing for the people of their means, right? But in the middle is the non-market housing, right? And here's where we need help, right? Government is working to build housing. They are doing that. And I celebrate the incredible work that both Huron County and the City of Stratford Social Services and other lower tiers of government are working hard on this issue. We can look in Stratford at the Britannia Street project, which opened recently. It's a wonderful example of housing, of non-market housing. We also can look at the Gibbon Street project in Goderich that's working towards its way to hopefully become supportive housing in part for Goderich. We can celebrate all those things. But I can tell you today that unless we do more, we're not going to even begin to touch the problem. Again, it's not because government isn't doing good things. It isn't because they're not working hard. It is because the problem has become so big because of decisions we made as a nation, as governments, 30, 35 years ago, it has caught up with us. And here we are with all kinds of trends that are pushing us. And non-market housing is where we need to be focusing our efforts. But we also need to be paying attention to how we do that longer term. And it may mean that you build sub-market housing in order to build non-market housing as we do this. And Kathy will explain some of that as we go forward. What is the role of nonprofits in helping us with non-market housing is one of the questions I want you to have ringing around in your head as you listen to Kathy and her presentation that's coming up. So that's the spectrum. A couple more things just before we jump into the United Housing presentation. Just so you're aware, the United Way, of course, is looking at this issue from many different angles. Okay, so we are trying as an organization, since identifying housing as our number one concern, housing and homelessness as our number one concern a few years ago, to work at this issue by taking care of people in their emergency. Okay, so we partner with all kinds of organizations, whether it's CMHA or whether it's ShelterLink or Safe Homes for Youth, or whether it's other organizations in our community. And we work together, oftentimes in partnership by funding them, but sometimes in other ways in partnerships to provide emergency responses alongside what government does, right? So the City of Stratford provides shelter, Huron County provides shelter, but there's lots of partnerships in terms of who delivers those services. The government and not-for-profit sector is intertwined in providing all these services. And the United Way is in the midst of that, strategically trying to be a leader and a voice in those conversations, improving those services and trying to deliver new services where we need. We have opened up connection centers in several different communities over the last few years, which is bringing services to people who are experiencing homelessness or otherwise vulnerable. That's a fantastic role for our organization to play, but it's not enough. It's not where we want to stop. We want to be part of the solution, right? So we're going to work at advocacy and education, which is going to be on the next slide. We're also going to continue to work at trying to actually solve the problem locally here. And so we're doing three things. We're helping people in their emergency. We're developing the local programs and services that we need to improve our response. And we're advocating at all levels of government in partnership with many other people. I see Pam on the call with our Poverty to Prosperity Network. Lots of people are doing this stuff, not just the United Way. And we are advocating for the policy changes that are going to make a difference. So, for example, when you look at that and try to stick it into a slide, this is one way of describing it. We need big system change, right? That's what we're after here. In the long run, we can't keep doing things the way that we've been doing them for the last 30 years, or guess what? We get the problem that we have. We don't want to do that. We're going to have to change. And so we have to continue to work at education, advocacy, and awareness at all kinds of levels. I'm thankful you're on the call today. You're learning, hopefully something significant that's new for you, or it's reinforcing things you've already known, and you're getting more fired up to do something about it, right? This is all our jobs, right? We have to continue to do our role, to tell our friends and family and our MP and our MPP, all the things that we know and have to be changed in our communities. We need to work together. There's all kinds of organizations, economic development strategies from different levels of government, nonprofit organizations that are working together to deal with workforce challenges that we have in our community. It's a big part of this effort too, right? So we've got all kinds of programs and services that we're working on related to homelessness that could be in that center as well. Everybody is working together in lots of significant ways. But here's the thing that we want to work on even more. We want to have a better integration of nonprofit organizations, melding our capacity with government capacity to take this on, okay? And so we have to see ourselves as partners. We have to work together. And we do this in lots of ways, but we need to continue to grow into this over time. And the United Way is taking steps to help that happen where we can. Of course, we're advocating for policies, the big system change. You know, for example, if we were actually able to overhaul the social assistance, social services across the nation and instill something like basic income and living wage, you know, as policies for the entire nation, we would do an awful lot to solve the housing crisis because we'd be fixing the number one issue, which is income as it relates to housing, right? So you can understand that those issues have to be talked about. And they're just examples. There's other, of course, advocacy strategies and other things we might advocate for, whether it's social assistance rates or whatever it might be. All these things have to work together so that we can work towards what we hope will be a full spectrum of available housing for people in our communities. So, with that in mind, I'm going to pass the baton over to Kathy Vasilakos, our new and wonderful Director of United Housing, to help you understand what it is that we're doing. But particularly, again, this is one solution of many. It is an important one, however, and it is one that we need your help with. We cannot do this alone. We are going to need partnerships from every social service agency and every human being in Perth and Huron counties for this to be successful. So think about ways that you can help to support. Kathy.
Thank you, Ryan. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Ryan has quite clearly articulated the challenge that we have. I think there are lots of reasons how we got here, but I think what I want to talk to you today about is how do we get out of it? And I want to take Ryan's big picture and I want to sort of condense it down and focus on the small but maybe large part the United Housing can play in the solution to the housing crisis. The United Way and especially the SRPC have been examining housing issues for many, many years. That you know, there are lots of reports, lots of data, lots of analysis. And the United Housing was officially launched in November 2023, but the project goes back at least 2 years when the United Way began a process to understand how they could understand their community development work, because that is the thing that they do quite well, and how they could actually expand that into the area of affordable housing. So next slide. So phase one of the United Housing Project was, there was a feasibility study, there was an advisory committee created, there was a strategic plan created, and that led to last November the official launch of United Housing on National Housing Day. And I think that is a bit of the background on how we got here. And so what the studies and consultations demonstrated was that there's a need for a not-for-profit housing developer that can bridge. It can bridge. There's a significant amount of work being done by the municipal service managers and municipalities that, Ryan talked about that. And there's, a lot of building, enough, maybe not, but lots going on in the private for-profit developer sector. But there is space in there to bridge a gap. And we think that, and what our consultations and studies, the feasibility study showed, that there's a space for a not-for-profit housing provider in Perth and Huron. Next slide. So I want to just go over very briefly United Housing strategic plan. We have a vision and a mission. And the vision is that by 2030, United Housing is an established and sustainable nonprofit housing developer in Perth Huron. By 2050, everyone in Perth Huron lives in housing that is suitable and affordable to their needs. And the mission being to build better communities by developing, creating, constructing, and managing affordable housing in Perth and Huron. And so what are the principles? So the next slide goes about what are some of the guiding principles for how we are actually going to achieve this. And so we have some development principles. One, it's not for profit. Two, every project has to be financially viable. So we do a lot of work around financial modeling to make sure that they are viable projects. I really want to emphasize the fact that these projects happen because we collaborate, and we collaborate with anyone who wants to come to the table, who shares our values around creating affordable, attainable housing. Affordability is another piece. All of our projects will be mixed income housing, and with the idea being that it's a third, a third, a third, and that would be a third affordable, a third what would be that fuzzy, poorly defined, attainable, sort of suitable workforce housing, and market rents. So we also have a development principle around, so these are all rentals, around mixed use. And mixed use can be mixed affordability, but also mixed use around the housing can be integrated with other uses. You can have community access centers and services that are actually integrated with the housing. You can have examples of revitalization of downtown commercial areas where you have mixed use, and you can actually increase and intensify housing in those areas, where you could have ground floor commercial and upper level residential. So that's the idea of mixed use. And the other part of it is community building. We do rental housing, but we just don't provide a structure. The management principles would allow for community building, and how these housing units integrate into the community, how they have access to other services, where they are, and how they're situated within their community. The projects will be as green as possible, because we also have a climate crisis on top of a housing crisis. And the other piece of it is that we want to be part of the homeless reduction. And so the idea would be that we would have units available for the by name, to take people off of the by name list and off of coordinated access lists. So in essence, so the next slide, United Housing's activities are centered around developing housing, operating housing, and property management. We are at the development stage of that. So the next slide sort of looks at the different phases of United Housing. The first one was startup, and we've sort of gone through that phase, and I talked about that a minute ago. What's next is our sort of pre-development stage, and I would say that we are firmly in phase 2 because we are exploring projects across the region. What I want to talk about in the next few slides is some examples that demonstrate the kinds of collaborations and partnerships we're considering. And it also will give you a sense of the scale of the projects that United Housing is considering, and that we are not limited by how small or how big the projects are. We're willing to take on little projects, but we also know how to think big and think into the future and take on some larger projects. So the first project that I want to talk about is probably the one that most people are familiar with in the next slide, and that is a partnership with the library and the municipality of North Perth. And right at the at the sort of bottom there, you can see the old Carnegie Library, and it would be a project that maintains the heritage portion, the heritage Carnegie portion of the library. It would have a library expansion and rebuild, and it would also include a community access center on the main floor, which would include service providers from across the region that would all be in one spot, and then upper level floors would be housing, 41 units of housing. And so this is a really good example of a think big mixed use project that I view it as a legacy project for a community. So that is one form of collaboration that we're taking on. Next slide. And so here's this is sort of the concept plan of how you can use little pieces of property. So we have a partnership in progress with another not-for-profit organization that has surplus land that they do not need and is sitting there, and to coin the term they use, they're just cutting the grass. And so here's an example where there's another not-for-profit that has a piece of land, and we have an alignment of values around affordable housing, but also workforce housing and understanding the needs of our community. And so here's another project that could see up to 60 units of stacked townhouses. So it's not just housing for singles or one bedrooms or small units. It's also larger units that would be suitable to, let's say, single families, small families, couples, things like that. So that's another form of collaboration that we're looking at. So the next slide. This one's actually, I quite like this one because I call it the still standing model of how you can actually increase housing. And I don't know if anybody knows that TV show Still Standing, where they go to small towns across Canada, right? But the thing that you always one of their very first shots of it is the community's main street, where it sort of pans down the main street. You see all of the little shops. Some of them are closed up, but there's all kinds of empty, underutilized space in the upper floors of these downtowns. And one of the things that we're considering is partnering with small businesses and business owners to revitalize downtown mixed use areas and to build rental housing above ground floor commercial. And so the idea is, how do we leverage that underutilized space? And it does a lot of things. It helps small businesses which are struggling right now. It gives them some cash flow through a master lease where they get money from the master lease that they have with United Housing. United Housing provides the capital required for either the renovation or the conversion of space to apartments. And then the added bonus is small businesses do not have to become landlords or property managers. United Housing takes that on as well. And these would be long-term leases. So it's a win-win. And it's also a really big win for the communities because downtown areas are the most walkable, active transportation, close to amenities. It revitalizes downtowns by adding residential intensification. So, I've looked at a number of community improvement plans for small towns, and intensification of residential units in their downtown areas is almost always in the plan. And so here's an example of there's some space in commercial ground floor in Listowel that is pretty much amenable to 10 units, 9 one bedroom and a bachelor unit conversion. And this is like a small project with a really nice price tag on it that is an easy win. The North Perth Library project is larger. It's more, we will take all those on and we'll just push each project along. So that's another example. So now I want to talk about how do we get there? And so I want to talk a little bit about what is the United Housing advantage. Why United Housing? In addition to not being a not-for-profit, that's one way we manage affordability. We envision creating affordable rental housing by leveraging relationships and partnerships with individuals and organizations that have values that align with United Housing. And that is our big value add in the rental housing space. And all of these things decrease the debt and debt servicing costs required to get housing built. But at the same time, not only do they add on the financial, the pro forma capital stack end of it, like all of the financial nerd stuff that we talk about a lot, it also adds to the community building aspect of it. So this housing is about people. And, you know, I sort of sometimes glibly say, you know, housing for people, not profit. And I think that's sort of, you know, in my head, that's my tagline. And so there's all kinds of things, like there's rebates, discounted services and products from local businesses. They come forward, they work really well with the United Way. They have in the past, they will in the future. We have grants available from the government and agencies. And one interesting part about these grants is the forgivable loan portion of a lot of these grants is higher for not-for-profits than it is for municipalities or for-profit builders. That forgivable loan portion being higher means we can funnel more money into creating more housing. And I think that's really, really important. Land donation or discounts, that's another piece of it. Donations is another piece of it. The United Way, as a community developer, is really, really good at raising money. And we can use that expertise that we have in house to run capital campaigns and raise money for some of these projects. But I think today, the next section of today is going to be talking about community bonds. And that is, it hasn't been used here, but it is a tool that's been used quite effectively in other places. And we have Jennifer here from Tapestry to talk about that. And I think Ryan's going to jump back on a little bit to talk a bit about the next part of today's presentation. But really quickly, community bonds are interest-bearing loans to finance United Housing projects. You can purchase a bond from the United Housing, you get a fixed rate of return on your investment, and at the same time, you get to help out your community. So back to you, Ryan.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. And Kristen, did Jennifer join us? Make sure she's here.
Jennifer is here, and we also have 2 questions in the chat box if there's a chance to address them right now. We have one from earlier in the presentation, that the definition of affordable housing that we shared from CMHC isn't the same as what the City of Stratford and Invest Stratford use. So how could we possibly get all partners to use the same or agree with CMHC?
It's a great question. I appreciate it. No, it is not the same definition that is used locally. The City of Stratford uses a definition that's related to framing things around attainable housing, and they have framed it so that they're helping the community understand that attainable housing is something for everyone. So they see attainable housing as the entire spectrum of housing and how you fit into it, and so that it's attainable for everyone. I think their stance is largely around making sure that we don't categorize people so much, right? You know, you're this kind of person and you have this kind of housing, you're so forth and so forth. And that there's a lot of help in that conversation. It's a good thing to consider. But we do fall backwards ourselves to the fairly straightforward definitions related to income, and we would encourage others to use it. It's not that the City of Stratford doesn't use that definition ever. It's just that their primary definition is a little bit different. So should we be all using the same definition? Yeah, I think we should. Have I been able to convince everybody to do that? Not yet. So if you have any ideas, brilliant ideas about how you can help us all do that, we're all ears. So first question answered. Next one.
Excellent. Okay, so the next question is, what criteria will be used to determine the viability of a project?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. I will start that and then ask Kathy to jump in. So there's lots of criteria. I mean, when we talk about viability, primarily in that piece of the conversation, we're thinking about financial viability, right? And so when we determine something is viable, it means simply that it has to cash flow, right? So there has to be enough income to cover the expenses, not only for the project, but also for the overhead of the new organization that we're birthing, right? And so what we want to do is to build a robust organization. You could see in the vision that our goal is in the next 10 years to have a robust organization. But beyond that, we want to make sure that the organization can perpetually build, right? So if we have a healthy organization with healthy projects that cash flow, then what we're going to have in the long run is an organization that can perpetually build housing. So that's the aim that we're aiming for. Kathy, do you want to add anything to that?
I do want to add, so there's some sort of logistical parts of it too. Like somebody could give us a piece of land, but if it isn't serviced and if nobody wants housing on there, and we get a whole lot of pushback, and there are headaches around planning approvals, zone changes, getting linear services, underground services, overground linear services out to, that could be quite problematic. So it would be something, something that requires us to, spend a lot of energy and time on a project that won't get approval. Those are considerations on viability of a project, right? On the other hand, if there's a community group or somebody who comes to us and they're really, really, really excited about building housing, and they have a lot of buy-in in the community, and they have a piece of property that has the services already there, and it's a great little fit because it's close to amenities and other services, and everyone's enthusiastic about it, that is going to, in the pipeline of projects that we're considering, that's probably going to get bumped up, right? Because the whole point of this is, I think there, and excuse my language, but there's a sort of really great article, just build some damn housing. And I think that's sort of like maybe part of it is like, can we make it the money work, but can we make the community building work as well? And I think that because long-term success of a lot of this housing, if it's housing for people, is that the people buy in and everybody's sort of participating. So that's my sort of, non-financial piece to what is viable.
Great, thanks. I don't see any virtual hands up. I don't see any more questions in the chat box. If something comes to you, feel free to put it in the chat box, and we should have some time at the end of the presentation to address any additional questions. I have also put in the chat box a link to a feedback survey that should take about 1 minute to fill out. So if you could please fill that out at the end of the presentation, we gratefully receive that from you. And I am going to move forward with introducing Jennifer Bryan. She is the Senior Campaign Manager with Tapestry Capital. And at Tapestry, Jennifer assists organizations in structuring effective community bond campaigns and building a strong investor and supporter base to raise funds for projects that make an impact. She has many years of sales and marketing experience in renewable energy, environment, arts, and the not-for-profit sector, and strives to bring creativity and ingenuity to every campaign. Jennifer believes that social finance creates healthy, vibrant communities. So she is the perfect fit for what we're trying to do with United Housing, and we're excited to hear her speak to us today. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Can everybody hear me? All set? Awesome. Okay. May I share my screen?
You should have sharing capabilities. Ryan, if you want to stop share. Perfect.
Great. Great. Thank you so much for having me today. It's been a real pleasure to work with United Way Perth-Huron. So I'm going to share a little bit about what we do and give you a little bit of a Community Bonds 101. I'm going to share why we love community bonds and how we think why other organizations should get involved and why United Way Perth-Huron is exploring this interesting financing opportunity. So I'm going to start off before introducing who Tapestry is. We'll talk a little bit about the challenge that we address, which is there are not-for-profits, charities, co-ops throughout the country, and they wish to acquire assets and scale impact, but they need access to capital to do this. And another piece that we know about this is that Canadians, both individuals and organizations, they want to do good things with their money, and not just in the donation and philanthropy space, but also in the investment space. But there lack, there's not a lot of information about this or opportunities and investment products available to do this. So this is where we come in. So our solution is community investment, community bonds. Organizations who want to raise money can go out to their communities. Community investors are going to make a standard return by investing in these wonderful projects they believe in. And today we're talking about housing, but we see this across all different types of organizations. Not-for-profits and co-ops can own assets that allow them to scale impact. and the communities that they in which they are operating are better served, and they have access to the spaces and the services that they need. A little bit about us. So we ourselves are a not-for-profit organization. We're a consultancy, and our goal is to make community finance accessible to social purpose organizations across the country, but also to make these opportunities available to investors, both organizations and individuals. So we guide organizations every step of the way, and we have been doing this for about 20 years and have helped issuers. These are all not-for-profits and co-ops to raise over 100 million in investments to fund their exciting projects in various different types of spaces. So a little intro to community bonds. So we hear a lot, we could get a mortgage for a portion of the purchase price of whatever it is we want to do, but we were left with a gap. We need money for renovations. And if we look at housing, we look at the capital stacks of organizations who are raising money for housing projects. They are very multi-layered. They've got grants, they've got donations, they've got government support, they've got all sorts of different aspects, but there's generally a gap. So why not reach out to their communities and bring them in and bring them on board? So what are these things? So we've found them to be a social finance tool that has been proven over time. Exclusively not-for-profits, charities, and co-ops can use them, and I'll show you the regulation that allows this in a little bit. An organization is the issuer of the investment. So United Way Perth-Huron or United Housing would be issuing the investment to their community. They are an interest-bearing loan, and those rates of returns depend on the organization and their capacity to offer a rate of return. And we'll get into how that is settled in a little bit as well. Most organizations will finance 10 to 50% of their project with a community bond. And in many cases, the bonds themselves can be held in RSP and or TFSA accounts, which is quite attractive to individual investors, as you can imagine. So the cycle works in a manner that a community member, individual, or institution buys a bond. The organization finances their project. So in this case, the housing project that United Housing is interested in, or multiple housing projects. Over time, you repay your investors and pay them interest. And at the end of the term of the investment, investors are invited to either reinvest if the organization needs to retain those funds, or they are paid out. So why do organizations do this? Well, they can raise the money when they need it. They go out to their communities. Most organizations like United Way have built an incredible base of donors and supporters and volunteers and a whole host of folks and organizations that are interested in what they do and want to be a part of it. Can rally your community as long-term investors. So when you develop an investment relationship with an organization, it's for the long term. Generally, your investment is 3, 5, 7 years. And from what we've seen, most investors, whether they be foundations, institutions, individuals, they love being a part of this, and they want to keep their money within the organization for the long term and help keep supporting what they're doing. This is an investment where you get to actually see your money at work, which is pretty rare. Another interesting thing is that we find community bonds catalyze other funders and political support. So once an organization has raised $500,000 through 50 to 100 individual investors, for example, we see the larger funders come on board. They get excited and interested. If they can raise this much money from individuals, this seems like something very legitimate that we should get involved in. And of course, we love the idea of building community wealth. Interest payments go back to people and organizations within the community, which is a win-win. An organization like United Housing would go through a journey with us. So United Way Perth-Huron and United Housing, for example, are kind of in the middle of this planning and feasibility and structuring phase. We work with organizations from the outset to determine, does this make sense financially? We build a financial model and look at the long term. Can an organization pay interest on these investments? What are their revenue models look like so that over time, their cash flow allows for payout of both interest payments, principal paybacks, etc. How much money do they need to continually raise over time? We structure the investments. We work with organizations to identify their communities, who are their, who are their potential investors. And if we survey those, community members, organizations, would they be interested in investing? And what would the rate of return and the terms look like for them that would be attractive? We build the campaign with them in terms of the infrastructure. We like a seamless onboarding process. We like a really robust investor package so that all types of investors can really learn about the organization, project, and the investment opportunity and feel comfortable and secure. And then we work towards the raising of the funds. And it's similar to a capital campaign in many ways, except of course, what's interesting is investors come in because of both that feeling of the warm fuzzies, as we like to call them, where they're doing something really good with their money, but they also get a rate of return. So it's kind of like a double return. And then, of course, we work with organizations to manage the investment in our system. There are interest payments and T5 slips and all those fun things that are part of the process. We'll look at a case study, and we'll start with Sketch Working Arts here in Toronto. If any of you know Sketch, they are an incredible organization that has programs for marginalized youth in the city of Toronto. Youth come in, and if they want to paint or dance or play music, they teach them how to do all of those things. They have other wraparound supports provided. And they have an incredible studio space here at Artscape Young Place in Toronto. Now, they had a bit of a challenge in that over the last several years and moving forward, they knew their rents were going to raise to a point that was going to be unsustainable for them. They were going to have to move again, and this is their third space in the last decade. So they decided that they needed to do something to provide them with stability. If we look a little bit about their impact, we knew that staying in the location also was very helpful because every time they moved, it was building their base over again, bringing the kids back to the place that they knew that was home. And we see that over, each year, over 500 new participants, each year, 15,000 youth engaged. It was really important to have that place for them that was stable. So they decided to raise community bonds to buy the building. This way they knew that the rents would be, the mortgage payments would be stable. They could bank on what the cash flow was going to look like over time. And so they were going to purchase their space through what they called Project Home. And we worked with them to set up their campaign. They worked on a community bond campaign whereby they offered 4 different series of bonds to their community members. They wanted to offer a bond or an investment that worked with their participants and their participant families. So they went with a low minimum on bond D at $500, as you can see on the bottom right, a fairly short term and an interest rate of 3%. And they also wanted to appeal, of course, to the investors who wanted a long-term investment with a little bit more, a little bit of a higher rate of return. And this is where they received more interest from foundations and institutional investors. In addition, they advertised a giving bond, which was the idea that at the end of each interest period, interest could be donated back to the organization. So as we can see, they raised the funds that they needed 1.4 million. So they have 4.4 million that they'd sold in bonds, 100 investors. And one of the really cool things that we loved is 55% of these investors were new to the organization. So they weren't volunteers, they weren't donors. They were due to publicity and the great news that was spread around about this campaign. They came in because they really loved what Sketch was doing and the message resonated with them. And so if we're thinking about housing, this message resonates across the country with people and the lack of housing and the need to support it. And of course, as they were partway through the campaign, the City of Toronto came in with $500,000 to help them buy the studio after they had received support from, they had 75 investors or something like that at this point. So they were already well on their way, and that's when the bigger money came in. We see this time and time again with these types of campaigns. So a little bit more about why an organization would select these. What's great for organizations is they can set the terms themselves, what works with their cash flow, what's their community interested in terms of rates of return. We love them because individuals and institutions can both invest. We can create series that appeal to all types of investors. Investors have a powerful pride of ownership, especially if you invest in something that you can go and see and feel and touch. It's very unique compared to a lot of times when you put money in your RSP and your TFSA and you have no idea where it goes and you just hope for the best. Most organizations find these faster than a traditional donation campaign, and usually run them in tandem actually with traditional donation campaigns. So supporters have the opportunity to invest, to donate, and in most instances they do both. The campaigns are generally oversubscribed. They're in demand, and Canadians want these opportunities. And an organization like United Housing can scale. So you can finance your first project and then continue on and finance subsequent projects because your investors usually want to stay with you for the long term. They're a good fit for organizations when the project is meaningful for the community. Obviously, housing in this case is meaningful. Organizations want to raise a sum of over $500,000, and there's a sustainable revenue model to pay investors back, and the organization has a network of supporters. And we've seen these work in numerous different types of organizations: affordable housing, renewable energy, arts and rec, community hubs. And Tapestry, our organization, is working or has received funding from the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation through the Housing Supply Challenge. And so we are doing a lot of focused work in the affordable housing space right now. Let's talk about another quick case study. This is Places for People, a wonderful organization out of Haliburton. They currently own 5 properties in our housing, numerous people there. One of the most housing challenged locations in Ontario and the country, and it's probably similar is as Perth-Huron, but their homeless and housing issues are very hidden because people are living with other people and in trailers and trucks and things like that because of their location. So they needed to consolidate. They had a lot of support from the community, mortgages and loans and things to finance these 5 properties. They wanted to consolidate those with some cheaper capital. So they raised $850,000 in 3 months from 72 investors, which puts them in a really great position now to work towards their next purchase. And so it was a very big celebratory event for them. And of course, now they are poised to do subsequent raises. They have this group of 72 people who are really excited about what they're doing and want to be involved in future campaigns as well. If we look at the co-working and innovation space, the Center for Social Innovation, which I'm at right now here in Toronto, has purchased numerous buildings through their community bond raises and have expanded. They have been raising community bonds for over a decade now, have raised tens of millions through the model, and have a few hundred really eager investors. How organizations can do this. There's a not-for-profit exemption that allows organizations to raise funds without having to go through the rigor that a for-profit organization, fund, etc. would have to, and they don't have to create a intensive prospectus. As long as, of course, as a not-for-profit, we know that no part of the net earnings can benefit anybody in any of the members or the supporters or board members of the organization, but also the security holders. And in addition, commission can't be paid in connection with the sale of the security. So the organizations or the issuers like United Housing have to go and sell these securities themselves. If you're a cooperative, there are some separate regulations that you follow, but we definitely work with numerous cooperatives as well. When organizations work with Tapestry, however, while they don't need to do a prospectus, we do work with them to do a quite comprehensive offering package so that investors have the information they need to make their decision. When we work with organizations as well, we support them in various capacities to help set up the campaign and guide them. And then the issuers, such as United Housing, does some of the work on their side as well, as they are the issuer of the securities. And one last piece that we'll talk about quickly is how organizations are setting bond terms. And so what's interesting is we work with them on financial modeling to make sense, in terms of what can this organization sustain, paying interest and principal paybacks and things like that. What's their community interested in, and also what's going on in the market. The market is quite interesting these days. So rates of return, we're having to manage, ensuring that organizations are remaining competitive in their rates of return, while also ensuring that they can sustain these kind of rates of return as well. So finally, I will close with that and know that there's probably lots of questions about the United Housing Project. And of course, I'm happy to field any questions about community bonds in general as well.